Hi, welcome back. Today I want to talk about an album that no matter where you go, if you go to any hi-fi show anywhere in the world, you're going to come across it. Also, if you go through the vinyl collections of jazz lovers and hi-fi freaks who love vinyl, you will find it for sure. This is an album that has become ubiquitous in the jazz world. It sold more than 1 million copies. It was the first jazz record to do so. And today in this talk, I want to investigate it further. I want to share some of the tracks with you. I want to talk a little bit about the background to it, so the recording of it. And I'm not going to just talk about the very famous track, which we will not mention until it comes at the end of side one, because this is a great album. It's got so many really good tracks on it. And I think its history is also very interesting, and trying to work out its place in the world. Because, well, when I was studying music, my professor would always say, right, Harley, you've got to count, you've got to count, you've got to count. And I would be counting away with music, trying to play my viola and counting at the same time, 3, 4, 2. And what I found was, by concentrating on the counting and on the technical aspects of trying to play the instrument, which I wasn't very good at, I lost the sense of soul. And I think this album fits into that argument, that some people think of it as being very technical, very based upon its rhythm, because it's called Time Out for a very good reason. Because on this album, Dave Brubeck decided, him and the quartet, which I'll introduce you to in a minute, that they were going to do each of the tracks in different time signatures in a way that was not traditional in jazz at that time, because jazz at that time was traditionally mostly in 4/4 time. Of course, there were variances for waltzes and stuff, but generally he wanted to approach it quite differently, and I'll come back to why in a minute. So back to my studies, when I am trying to count and work out, oh yeah, this is what time is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or is it in 3? Or is it in 6? Or is it in 2? Then some of that magic of the emotion and the music is lost. And conductors have this the whole time. The conductor conducting the orchestra has got to keep an eye on the orchestra, the timing, the pitch, and bring everybody in, hold them back, adjust everything. So it's very hard for them to really appreciate the joy and the wonder of the music at the same time. Of course, when they've been doing it for many years, and the panic and the fear of trying to keep a 150-piece orchestra together is over, then of course I'm sure it must be a very different experience. Anyway, back to the album. So this album, each track more or less has rather unique time signatures, or several time signatures. And some people therefore say, because of its rhythmic structure, because of its discipline, that it hasn't got soul, that it's not real jazz or, really emotional music. And I'm going to argue that that's not true, that it has. And just like Mozart and even Bach, for example, could also be very structured, there is still plenty of room for the musicians to bring their full emotions and life experience and soul into it. And I'm going to argue that this is a very soulful album indeed. And I will be playing some little excerpts to illustrate what I want to say. Okay, so in a minute I will play them through, and if you want to jump straight to that, then go into the description below and click on the chapter. Or if you want to hang around, I'm going to give a little bit of background about the recording itself and a bit about the musicians in the Dave Brubeck Quartet. So let's get started. Okay, so first of all, this album was recorded over 3 days, and it was recorded in a church, which is legendary because a few months earlier, A Kind of Blue was recorded by Miles Davis in that same church. And I need to jump to a little story about what inspired me to do this album now. And that was because a customer of ours came to visit me here in Belgium in the listening room to hear our Sibelius loudspeakers. And he came all the way from England, and he was thinking about buying a pair. And one of the albums that he brought with him was this album. And we were listening to it, or bits of it, and I was thinking, is this mono or is this stereo? Because it sounded so open and full, and I didn't know anything about the recording techniques at that time. And then I looked at the album and said, no, it's mono. And that got me thinking, because I started doing some research on the album recording itself, and I found it was recorded by Frederick Plaut, who also recorded the Kind of Blue album, if I'm not mistaken. But it's certainly in the same location. And that church has a kind of echo to it, which is very warm and forgiving. And apparently it's got a wooden floor and wooden panelling. And that reminded me of a recording I made in 2018 of the Verguen ensemble, and the Verguen ensemble, I should say. And I came across them because Émile Souvagy was a brilliant young clarinetist who came through the Young Belgian Talent program, which Pearl Acoustics sponsors. And he asked me if I could make a recording of him with this ensemble, because they'd just won an international prize. So I took them off to a chapel which has, I think, an acoustic very, very similar to the way that this album is recorded. It had a long, slow echo that just faded out, and whatever echo you got back sounded exactly like the sound of the instrument. So it was a wonder to record there. So I put them in a kind of, not full semicircle, but in a ring, and just a simple Blumlein technique where you put the microphones on top of each other at 45 degrees, and that spaced them around it. And I had just a couple of other microphones for ambience, and that was it. And I didn't need to manipulate the sound at all. So I'm just showing you a little bit of it here. You see how the sound echoes, all of that decay on those slow notes and those long drawn out notes. It just fades away. I didn't need to add any artificial echo at all. And so the skill was just placing the microphones at exactly the right place, so the amount of echo and the amount of presence was in balance. And this is what the engineers have done with this album here. And what is interesting is it says, I saw in some research that, they recorded it for both mono and stereo. Well, this is a really strange thing. If you were listening closely, you will have noticed that that excerpt from YouTube was actually in mono. I don't know how or why, but the soundtrack that got uploaded ended up being in mono. So what I've done is I've gone back to the original recording just yesterday, and just basically panned those microphones left, right, as they should, full as they were intended. No EQing, no nothing. And I've uploaded it to our website. So if you want to go there, you can download for free the stereo version of that recording. And then you can hear and compare the YouTube against the full. And that will be, I'm guessing it's an 88.1 88.2 24-bit recording, so it's going to be a full recording if you want to hear that quality. So the sound, the way it's recorded, affects the music that we hear, because it means that most of these things were taken in one take, that there probably wasn't a lot of cutting and editing and chopping and mucking about. They didn't need to EQ it much. And what you get here is, and what you will hear in this, that sometimes there's little mistakes coming in, little mistakes in the piano, and sometimes Paul Desmond's saxophone will be a little bit, where the reed has got a bit of spittle in it, and so you get a very sort of raucous sound, and you can say yes, he definitely wanted it, but then other tracks it's not there, and sometimes you can hear he's just not quite making a note, which on a modern digital recording session I'm absolutely sure that my clarinetists and saxophonists will say, oh, can we stop, I need to do that again, or can we just insert a correct note there so everything is perfect. And this album isn't perfect, and that's what makes it sound so great. So it's produced by Teo Macero, who studied at the Juilliard School of Music. So there's a lot of classical background to him, and he's obviously used to working with orchestras and larger ensembles. And he later became famous for working with Miles Davis on a Kind of Blue, which was recorded a bit earlier, and Bitches Brew, which came later, of course. Amazing album. I'll come back to Bitches Brew in the future because it's such an incredible piece. So there we are. I think we've covered everything we need to there. So I think it's time to talk a little bit about our musicians. Dave Brubeck was born on the 6th of December in 1920. He died on the 5th of December in 2012. And he learned the piano from his mother. And he had a number of brothers. I can't remember how many, 3 or 4 older brothers. He was the youngest in the family. And I think his mother wanted him to become a classical pianist, but he had very bad eyesight. He could hardly even read the scores. And anyway, he didn't, obviously. But his older brothers were all musicians. And his father was hoping that he would stay behind and manage the ranch, because he was brought up on a ranch. His father ran a ranch. So he was sent off to college to study veterinary science. And so he must have been very clever. Anyway, he flunks out of veterinary science because he hears music coming from the music conservatoire, which is just over the way from where he's studying. And he meets up with a few people, and eventually he is persuaded by Darius Milhaud, was a professor at that college. And he's a renowned French composer at the time, and he persuaded Dave Brubeck to make the switch, which he did. Now, during the war, Dave Brubeck became a band leader of a multiracial group of musicians who toured around entertaining the troops. And after the war, he was playing in clubs and developing his techniques, and he meets his saxophone player, Paul Desmond, in San Francisco in 1944. Now, Paul Desmond, alto sax, well, if you know Take 5, everybody knows that song, everybody knows that tune, they can hear the saxophone in their head. He has a very unique sound, or a unique way of playing. Now, he was born a little bit younger 4 years younger than Dave Brubeck. He was born in 1924, sadly passed away in 1977. And his father was a pianist, organist and composer. But he only was sort of playing saxophone for fun. And so that was something that came a little bit later in life, because he went off to San Francisco State College, where he studied English and creative writing. And that's something that I discovered when I was doing my research for this album, that Paul Desmond actually had a not a wicked sense of humour, but certainly a good ironic sense of humour. It's a couple of quotes I've made a note here. When I get too old to play, I'll just become a legend. Something which apparently he said. And he said, I would gladly do this job for free, but it's the rehearsals and travel that I charge for. And that is something I think that is also interesting, because at times I get the feeling that Paul Desmond irritated Dave Brubeck because he didn't always practice a lot. And Dave Brubeck even said once, well, why aren't you sort of practicing and working on this? And he had much more of it will be all right on the night. And I think it's Dave Brubeck's obsessive playing and everything being technically correct and perfect, which gave the platform for someone, a lyricist like Paul, to play and become the great musician that we know him for. Now, of course, the quartet needs a bass player, and the bass player was Eugene Wright. He was born in 1923, so they're all of a very similar age. Sadly passed away in 2020. He was nicknamed the Senator, and he was born and raised in Chicago. And there was a very lively jazz community there at the time. He played the cornet when he was younger, but he was self-taught on the bass. And he formed his own quartet before he met Dave Brubeck. And he played with some very big bands like Count Basie and a number of others. And he was really renowned for his steady playing, his ability to adapt from swing, for example, swing jazz, right the way through into bebop. And we will see during this talk how his playing influenced and made the quartet complete, because he joined the quartet in 1958, just before this recording is made in June 1959. So they had a time to play together and really fuse together before going into the studio. So that just leaves one more musician, which is Joe Morello on drums. Joe Morello, the youngest of them all, born in 1928, died in 2011. He was born into a working class Italian-American family in Springfield, Massachusetts. And his parents encouraged him to play music as a child, and he learnt the violin. And apparently, and I don't quite understand how, but apparently he played with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I don't know if it was the youth orchestra or the main orchestra. But anyway, at a certain point, around the age of 15, he meets Lasse Heifetz. And he's so in awe of Heifetz's playing, which, well, I think the whole world is still today, that he decided violin isn't going to be for him, because he realized he would never get to the level required to play as a soloist at that level. And my brother-in-law is a doctor, and he specialized in sports medicine. And sometimes people come to him, footballers or runners or cyclists, and their parents are obviously pushing them into that particular field of sport. And just by looking at their physique and their muscle structure and stuff, he can say, well, if you want to stay in that direction, I don't think they're ever going to really make it to the top, or it's going to be much harder for them to get there because they're not naturally built for that. It would be better if they switched. But of course, you've got to have the desire to play that sport, the desire to play that instrument, as well as the natural ability. And so he decided to switch to the drums, and he took up formal training with George Lawrence Stone, who wrote a book called on stick control, as controlling of sticks. And there are some amazing videos of Joe Morello playing solos. I will put a couple of links into the description below. There's one where he's doing a solo with a drum roll with one hand and one stick, and his stick control is phenomenal. So much so that drummers that you may know, like Steve Gadd or Vinnie Colaiuta, those amazing drummers, they look to Joe Morello as their source of inspiration. So there you go. So he's played with Brubeck. They had a sort of an on and off relationship at the very beginning of playing together, but he decided he would stay with the quartet for 2 years and then go solo. Lo and behold, he ended up staying for many, many years more. So that's Brubeck and his band. I think it's time to play some music. So we're going to start off with track side 1. Actually, I want to give you a little tip. If you're going to play this album for the first time in a long time, or the first time ever, then sometime maybe it's a good idea to start with side 2, because I think side 2 is the overlooked side. But I'm going to go through it in sequence anyway, and we're going to start with Blue Rondo a la Turk. Now, it was Paul Desmond who gave the idea to Dave Brubeck to call it Blue Rondo, because Mozart in 1783 wrote a piano sonata called Rondo alla Turca, which he wrote in 2/4 time. But Dave Brubeck, when he went on a sort of a US government-backed tour of Europe, ended up in Turkey and ended up hearing pieces of music in 9/8 time. So you're literally counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's lots of ways of counting it, but basically there's 9. It's just subdivided to 2, 2, 2, 3 sometimes. But anyway, and he was asked one of the Turkish musicians, why do you use that rhythm? And he said, that's the rhythm we always use. And I'm going to put some links in below to some videos or some tunes of these Turkish rhythms, some of them which are used in sort of weddings and things like that. So you can hear for yourself how that rhythm structure is and what inspired Dave Brubeck to do this. But it's a rondo, which means you have a theme, followed by another one, coming back to the first one, followed by another one, coming back to that one, going back, and switching over. So what he does really cleverly is he drops from 9/8 into a solid swing 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Lets it swing. So you get this wonderful contrast between the two. Let's get started then. Let's get started. So this is the opening to Blue Rondo a la Turk. Time out. Track 1. Well, what an opening to an album. It's incredible, isn't it? It's, you see, did you notice in the left hand, da 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 dum, pum pum pum, sometimes Brubeck is using very dissonant notes, and that's power and energy. I think it's fantastic. A great opening to the album. And then, of course, at the end, we go into that 4/4 section, don't we? The swing. And when I listen to that swing, sometimes, you know, it's so reminiscent of the time. It sort of reminds me of Bobby Darin singing, you know, Somewhere Beyond the Sea, or Sinatra or something. Just have a listen to some of this, just a bit of that swing there. Isn't that amazing? It's just such lovely swing, and Morello's drumming there is just letting it happen. But also, he's so subtle, Morello. I just really like drummers like that. That reminds me of Pick Withers when he used to play with Dire Straits. He was just doing the subtle things, and you wouldn't even notice the drums so much. And that's what makes a great drummer. Here, he's in the background, but he's letting it swing with the help, of course, Eugene Wright. And let's listen to Eugene Wright a little bit more, because he's famous for his rhythm and his steadiness. And we've got this typical walking bass coming here. Listen to that. Great drum sound, isn't there, on that recording? It really, we'll come back to that a little bit later on. Now, many of you will know an artist called Donald Fagen, part of Steely Dan. And in his album, The Night Flight, he refers to Dave Brubeck. He says, we will need some jazz on the new frontier. And I read a quote recently that Donald Fagen really liked, obviously, Dave Brubeck, but he wasn't a fan of Miles Davis's Bitches Brew album. He said, they're trying to do funk and they're not tight enough, they're not tight enough, they're not tight enough. Well, I don't know of any jazz ensemble, certainly at this time, that is any tighter than this band is. Rhythmically, it's just incredible how these guys hang together. Now, when you haven't got someone like me nattering on the whole time and you're just listening to the album, I strongly recommend you to sit back, listen to the whole of side one in one go, no interruptions, because you'll see it's a bit like a sonata form in itself, because you've basically got the three tracks, Blue Rondo a la Turk, Strange Meadow, Lark, which is coming up now, and Take 5. And the way that these three blend together is phenomenal. And after this very powerful, imposing opening number, what do we need? We need a little bit of light relief, don't we? We need to just be taken, like in a sonata, in the second movement, to somewhere more gentle, more emotionally open and engaging, to lead us on to that last movement. So let's hear to this track, second track, Strange Meadow, Lark. So he's just chosen for a solo piano. And that style in itself has influenced so many pianists. You can walk into any hotel around the world, and if there's a pianist, if you're lucky, they'll be playing something like that. So let's just take from the end of the piano solo into the band, where the band come in. Desmond, as lyrical as ever, just so beautiful. And it's so sad that most people only play take 5 and that's it, or maybe Blue Rondo a la Turk, because that is a really beautiful track. But I'm not finished yet, because I want to play you some very interesting, listen out here for Eugene Wright's bass playing here, because it's so difficult to do what he's doing, because Dave Brubeck is, well, he's sort of improvising, but he probably isn't. But he's going all over the place. And how do you, as a bass player, get exactly the right note at the right intensity, volume, and at the right pitch? Because his chord structure is extremely complex. And I know it wasn't written down. Really nice. I hope this microphone is capturing what we got in the room, but I strongly recommend you just grab the album or stream it, however you like to listen to your music. So let's just move on to the end of the track, because I think it's got a lovely ending, because it's got this lovely little coda to what I consider to be the second movement of this three-piece sonata. And that makes you want to move on to the next piece, doesn't it? You know, something's happened there, it's stopped, but it's kind of not resolved. It's never resolved, and you'll find that a lot in Brubeck's music, that sometimes something obvious is happening, but it doesn't quite resolve. And how is he going to resolve it? It's really simple how he's going to resolve it. He's just going to do this. better. A little bit of light drumming, and then this wonderful solo melody from Paul Desmond. Now, it seems that Dave Brubeck got the idea of that 5/4 rhythm structure, and him and Joe Morello had kind of worked out what they're going to do. But they hadn't got a melody, and he asked Paul to come up with something, and that's what he came up with. And I think quite generously gave the rights, the credits to Paul Desmond. So Paul Desmond got the credits for that song and earned money from it. And after he died, the money he was still earning as credits, royalties, he donated to, I think, to the American Red Cross or to a good cause. Anyway, so that's the beginning of Take 5. Now, one of the things, and I think the reason why this is played so much in hi-fi shows and stuff like that, is because A, it's a good recording, and that saxophone always sounds nice, and people recognise the tune, and it's a kind of tune that you don't really get fed up with as well, funnily enough. But in the drum solo, there's some amazing kick drum sounds, or actually I think it's not a kick drum, I'm sorry, it's a kind of the side tom. He's got boom, and he manages to get a really nice low note out of it, but with a really good resolving system. It's not a thump you get this lovely full sound of harmonics from that skin and the attack of it at the same time. Similar to what I was talking about in my video on how I assess hi-fi systems. So let's have a little listen to a bit of this drum solo. Well, not all of it, just going to play a little bit where those reels come, because everybody knows this track very, very well. System that you can get that, you want that really fast, energetic sound, but not exaggerated, and yet able to give you that full sound of that skin. And it's lovely, isn't it? So let's just go to the end of this and see how this ends, if you remember how it goes, just because it's why shouldn't we? So now that's the end, I think, of that sonata. For me, that's enough. We can play side 2 on another day or later on. You don't need to play right the way through. But if you decide to turn the album over, something interesting happens, because the second side opens with 3 to Get Ready. And actually, this track fits perfectly, key-wise, time signature-wise, after take 5. Have a listen to this. if you notice very closely, the piano sound on this track is a little bit duller. It's not as bright. Now, I don't know if it's a different piano they used or whatever, because this was recorded first in June the 25th, and the track before it, take 5, was I don't know when it was, to be honest with you. A3, it was on July the 1st, so it was a few days later. So I know that it was different engineers, but I think it might have been the piano that got changed for that session. I may be wrong. If you know, because there must be a lot of experts out there, please let me know. So now I'm going to go into Kathy's Waltz, just the opening of it, just to show you again how this album flows so beautifully. Now, what I think is, you hear me laughing there because I just love the way that Dave Brubeck just brought in a third, just a little chord there where you're not expecting he's playing singular notes, and then suddenly and that effect is amazing. And if you listen really closely, you hear that he extends some notes slightly longer than others to create an effect. And so suddenly, da-da-dum, bum, and it's really short, and then the first note might be slightly longer, so they're not totally equal. And in that way, he creates lots of interest and colour, and I think emotions and humour, sense of humour comes through this, through his playing. I'm absolutely sure of it. Now, this next bit, this little section, comes just a bit later than this section here, and I'm thinking the Beatles. Now, obviously, the Beatles a little bit later, not much though. 1962, when they made their first recording, I think, end of 62, 63. Listen to this tune. Is that All My Loving from the Beatles? I mean, that would have been played on the radio, I'm sure, at the time. John Lennon or whatever may have heard that, but it sounds like it to me, or maybe I've got the wrong Beatles song. Let me know in your comments. A friend of mine, Michelle Tilcan, the conductor, is always saying to me, Harley, you're always pointing these things out about how this is coming from there. He said, this is happening all the time in music. He said, when I'm conducting and studying my scores for orchestral concerts, I'm always aware of where all these different pieces are flowing from. He sees it as a kind of endless river of sounds, but and ideas and inspiration are not so much just coming from one source. Let's move on to now Kathy's Waltz, because we're still in Kathy's Waltz. This is Kathy's Waltz. Sorry, I'm sorry if I didn't mention it. But just after this Beatles quote, as I've put in my notes here, there's a lovely little sax solo which just shows how amazing Paul Desmond is. Listen to this. could play that all afternoon. Of course, with copyright, I want to keep things short and with respect. But isn't that a beautiful, beautiful solo? The phrasing, the expression. And it's nice to be in a nice 3/4 rhythm at this stage, into a nice little waltz rhythm. That's nice. So, right, the next track here is Everybody's Jumpin'. Let's just listen to this. Now there you see that da 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 da, pum pa pum pa pum pa, and they're all together playing in unison, that rhythm. And this is where I want to show you, I think, the genius of Dave Brubeck Quartet is that during the solo, the sax solo that comes later, Brubeck is doing that, but just very gently on the piano in the background. You can hardly hear it. It's almost like it's coming from another room. Listen to this. You see, that's what I think the subtle genius of this album is all about. It's the way that these things are phrased and the way that they're moving together. So we've just basically got one last track before we wrap up, and that's Pick Up Sticks. And I'm just going to play you towards the end of this track. It's such a great album. I hope I've convinced you to go out and get hold of this album. It's from its lovely cover right the way through to all its tracks. It's so complete, so perfect. It deserved to sell 1 million albums, and maybe you'll go out and buy more copies of it, and hopefully someone will benefit from that. If you have been, as always, I hope you enjoyed this little excerpt. Let's just end the album, the Pick Up Sticks, take it to the end. That's why it's called Time Out. All those different signature tunes going, signatures, time signatures going on at that point. And Eugene's going boom, 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 boom. He's been doing that all the way through that track. And then Joe's been filling and doing his usual thing and playing out of the beat and having a bit of fun. And Dave Brubeck sitting there absolutely keeping perfect time. Well, if you have been, I hope you have enjoyed this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.